Hi guys, welcome to the archive. Today I've got a quick and easy paint scheme that's designed for Wizkids Bugbears, but really could probably be used with any bugbear model or even similar models. The main aim of this paint scheme was to get something that was easy enough for anyone to use, that was quick to achieve, and that still give great results that look fantastic on a D&D table. It's mostly designed for those who are new to painting, but if you're more experienced and you maybe want to pick up a little colour combination and don't want to go through the experimentation phases yourself, then feel free to pick up some ideas. As we're going to be using contrast paints to achieve these quick results, you will need to do a base spray in Wraithbone. Now, if you're not confident with spray painting and you haven't done this before, check out my other video on that. I'll link that in the description below. But it is important to spray in this spray paint because this particular type of spray paint has a special quality that allows contrast paints to have their full effect. We'll also need the following paints and tools. I mostly use Citadel as they were the brand that I started with 2 decades ago, which also goes to show how long this stuff can last. The only things here that need to be bought from Citadel are the contrast paints and spray. Everything else can be bought from a cheaper brand if you prefer. I've included alternative links for everything below where possible. The Cygor Brown, Snakebite Leather, Gore-Grunter Fur and Wildwood contrast paints, along with a pot of Lamian Medium. You might also want to pick up a pot of Wraithbone in case you go over a section by mistake. Wildwood is somewhat optional. Cygor could be used instead in a pinch if you'd rather buy one less paint. You'll also need Abaddon Black, or equivalent, as a base coat for the metal colours. You'll need Gunmetal, which is an Army Painter paint, or Lead Belcher, which is a Citadel equivalent, and Dark Tone, again Army Painter, or Nullnoy, the Citadel equivalent. Alternatively, instead of Dark Tone, you can use Strong Tone, or its equivalent, Agrax Earthshade. It'll make the metallics look a little dirtier, and the shadows on the base a little less dark, but nothing drastic. You'll also need Skeleton Horde for some of the cloth and claws. There are other brands out there, these are just the common brands that I would use. Finally, you'll need some basing materials. I've used Sterling Mud and Middenland Tufts alongside some Dryad Bark paint for the base edging and the rockier earth. There are cheaper options out there than this for basing. If you'd like a video on the cheaper basing options, just let me know in the comments below. You'll need a good quality brush. Here I've used a Citadel small layer brush. I've also used a medium glaze brush for the contrast paints, but this isn't crucial, it just helps a little and I already have one. You'll also need a less quality brush. Here I've just used a craft brush as an example, or a toothpick, or as I am using here, a sculpting tool. This is to spread the basing material. Honestly, if you've got an implement that you could use as a tiny shovel, it will probably work. You'll also need a water pot. I have this one, but a mug will do in a pinch. Grab some kitchen roll to dry your brush off with as well. I've also used a clamp to hold the Mini, this one from Citadel. This isn't crucial, you can simply hold the Mini by the base, but a clamp will be more comfortable and give you more control. It's really up to you if you use one. Finally, you'll need a palette. You can grab one from various craft stores, but for years I used an old piece of white kitchen tile if you're looking for a cheap option. If you've heard of wet palettes, don't worry about them if you've just started. They can be useful, but for a beginner, I'd focus on learning with a normal palette first. A wet palette adds another layer where mistakes can be made. Before starting, it's worth mentioning, contrast paint is quite thin, and it behaves more like water than paint. So be careful when you are painting with it and try to use smaller amounts and then add more if you need it, rather than putting on a large amount, as it is much easier to add more than it is to remove excess. Contrast paint will also dry quite quickly, so try and finish off each small area before moving on to the next. If you don't do this, it can dry, and when you go over that line in order to match up the fresh coat of paint that you're applying to that section, it can leave a mismatch of tones. Don't panic if a section has dried and it's left a line that you're going to have to go over. This is a natural part of learning to paint. If you're truly unhappy with that dried on line, you can go over it with a 50-50 mix of Wraithbone and water. It might take a few coats to cover up the mistake, but once you've completed it, you should be able to have a fresh go with the contrast paints. You can do this a couple of times before the additional paint becomes too thick and might start obscuring some details. Also, because it dries so quickly, it can be a good idea to wash your brush when using contrast paints every few times it runs out of paint. Not only does this make it easier to wash the brush, it also will make your brush last longer. You'll see in my painting here, I'm having a little trouble with an oil-like effect on the Mini. The paint won't quite stay where it should. This is because these particular Minis I ended up handling a lot more than I usually would before painting them, due to recording these videos, and the natural oils from my hands have remained on the Mini. This can happen to any Mini, so if you've handled yours a lot after removing it from the package, particularly if you've done so with greasy hands, it can be an idea to wash the Mini carefully in hot soapy water. Check out my other video on preparing Minis for painting for more tips on preparing the Mini. If you find this happens to your Mini, a good tactic to get around it is often simply being a stubborn git. More paint rarely solves the problem, and often makes it worse as it runs off. Repeatedly painting the same area, however, slowly allows the paint to gain purchase on the surface and learn to do as it's told. Before I start, I will say this is the first time I've painted a Mini on camera, and it might be the most awkward thing I've ever done. That said, I'd also say to any new painters out there that everyone has their own standards of painting, and the only ones you have to care about are your own. First things first, it's a good idea to look over the model and spot any areas where the spray primer didn't cover. This is quite hard to avoid entirely, even using the tricks that I've mentioned in my other video. It's easy enough to fix though. Simply mix up some Wraithbone and water in a mixture that has the consistency of milk. You don't want it too watery, but you want it a little more watery than paint straight out of the pot. With that mixture, go over the areas you missed with a thin coat. If it doesn't seem to fully cover in the first coat, don't worry, just let it dry and do another. Thin coats are almost always better than thick coats to avoid obscuring detail. After that, we're going to start with the bulk of the fur, which I've done in snakebite leather, with no medium mixed in, straight from the pot. I've aimed to draw the paint into the recesses, and soaked up any excess into a dry brush. Once the fur is done, we can move on to the hair, which again I've done straight from the pot, this time in Cygor brown. If you've gone over anywhere, you can patch it up with a Wraithbone and water mix like I mentioned earlier. I've then added a base coat of black over any areas I'm intending to paint metallic. This step is to provide a deeper, more realistic finish to the metal colour. Don't worry if you don't get a perfect coat. This layer will simply darken down the layer above. For the metal, I've used gunmetal with a touch of water, just enough to help it flow a little, similar to the Wraithbone before. If it feels like water, you've gone too far. Normal paints are meant to be less runny than contrast, even when applied. After that dries, I've added a wash of dark tone to give shading. Make sure the metallic paint is totally dry before this step. An alternative here, if you like the bronze effect on some of my other bugbears, is to use snakebite leather from the pot over the top of the metal. For most of the belt leathers, I've used Cygor brown again for that dark leather look. It can be a good idea here to start with a thin layer and add a little extra that gathers in the center of the belt to give it that lighter toned edge. Some of the other leather I've painted in Gore-Grunter fur, mainly to give it a bit of colour variety from the other browns on the model. Try to draw the contrast paint up to the top of the leather strips and lay the model flat to dry. This will add to the appearance of shade on the leather. I've also done some of the cloth in this colour on the other bugbear. For the weapon haft, I've used wildwood. If you didn't want to buy an extra paint for this, Cygor brown would probably fill in well enough. For the teeth, claws and cloth, I've made sure I haven't gone over the area with another paint, cleaned it up if I had to, and then giving it a coat of Skeleton Horde. Cleaning it up for a lighter toned contrast paint like this is particularly important, as it will show through far more. Finally, you'll notice that the Mini is now very shiny. We're going to dull that right down by coating anything non-metallic in a decent coat of Lamian Medium. Make sure you shake the pot thoroughly before applying, or it can end up just making the gloss worse. Don't worry too much about the thickness of this. A thin layer will do, but a slightly thicker layer won't do any harm. When it dries, this should give a lovely matte finish to the Mini. If it dries and you missed some spots, don't worry. You can just go back and go over them again. Lamian Medium has a clear finish, and it won't disturb any of the paint mixtures below. We then just need the final step, basing. Firstly, I've painted the entire base in Dryad bark, before giving the moulded earth attached to the Mini a coat of Strong Tone or Agrax Earthshade, mixed about 50-50 with Lamian Medium. I've done this not only to ensure it gives a nice matte tone to the finish, but also to thin down the Strong Tone a little to make sure it's not too heavy. Again, if you wanted to avoid buying another paint just for one step, Dark Tone or Nuln Oil would do here. Then, using your cocktail stick, disposable brush, sculpting tool, or whatever it is you're using, take some Stollen Mud and apply it to the lower base. Don't worry about making it even. This stuff actually looks more realistic as mud when a little messy. Wipe off any excess from the edge of the base and repaint the edge in Dryad bark. Finally, add 1 or 2 clumps of grass. They have a sticky underside, so you don't actually need any glue. As you can see, the finished product looks great for tabletop and takes very little time or skill to paint this way. Perfect for a new DM. I've also included, in a bit of a Blue Peter moment, some models I made earlier. You'll see here that the bronze effect that I mentioned, as well as some nice variation in fur and leather tone, where I've simply used the same colours but on different areas. This adds some variety to the models, as they do all have the same 2 poses. The lighter yellow fur was snakebite leather, mixed 50-50 with contrast medium, while the lighter red fur was Gorgrunter flesh, again mixed 50-50 with contrast medium. If you're looking to make things cheaper, if you're careful, you can get away without buying a pot of Wraithbone. If you don't mind it being more monotone, you can pick either Cygor Brown or Gorgrunter fur for the leathers. You can also use Cygor instead of Wildwood on the weapon haft, and use Strong Tone or Dark Tone rather than both. That said, a lot of those paints are strong core colours that you'll probably want to pick up in the future anyway if you continue painting, so use your best judgment. Finally, of course, you can forego basing materials and grass tufts. I hope this video has been useful. If it was, please hit subscribe. Have you got your own thoughts on this miniature? Do you have your own paint scheme that you think is simply genius and I must see immediately and comment on? Leave it in the comments. I always love hearing new ideas. That's all from me for now. Until next time, I'll be in the archive.